Okay, we're looking at Goal 3, the Civil War and Reconstruction. So the first question that you have to answer here, question 22, prior to the Civil War, what was the North's position on tariffs and what is the South's position? Remember, a tariff is a tax on an imported good. So the only people who are ever going to like it are people who actually produce goods, and that would be the North. So the North loved factories, and they had that factory system, so they're going to love tariffs. The South is going to hate tariffs because all they have is cotton, tobacco. They have plantation systems, and so they have to buy all of their manufactured or produced goods. So they hate tariffs for that reason. So the next one, explain two parts of the Kansas-Nebraska Act and how did this contribute to sectionalism. So Kansas and Nebraska, they're territories that are supposed to decide whether they want to have slavery or not. So it's popular sovereignty. Now, that means the people vote. So popular sovereignty from now on is going to determine whether a state is slavery or not. And this basically overturned that old Missouri Compromise that had been created for the Louisiana Territory. And this had been Louisiana Territory zone. So people felt that it was allowing slavery to expand. The South absolutely loves the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The North absolutely hates it. You have to understand that when you allow people to vote, it could go your way, but it could also go the other way. So it could go your opponent's way. And so when you do the Kansas-Nebraska Act, essentially what you're doing is you're opening up the possibility of slavery. So what contributed to Bleeding Kansas? Naturally, it's going to be the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Because in Kansas, you're going to have free and slave Kansas. So half of the state is going to be a free state, half of the state is going to be a slave state. You have two governments, two state governments within a state. It doesn't work. And so John Brown, the radical abolitionist, is going to come into Kansas and they're going to start hacking up plantation owners, these farmers who own slaves. It's bleeding Kansas because Americans are fighting over whether we want to have slavery or not. And it's kind of the first time we're really going to see Americans fighting each other over the question of slavery. What led to the birth of the Republican Party in 1854 is the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So what happens is the know-nothings, the ones that are Northern Democrats, you're going to see some of them breaking away. You're going to see people who are unhappy with the actual Democrat Party joining this brand new political party. So the know-nothings, which is a nativist group, they join. Free Soilers are going to join. You just get a lot of different people joining the Republican Party. So what issue actually divided the North and South the most before the Civil War? It's simple. It's the extension of slavery into the new territories. So when you look at all this stuff, you're looking at Kansas and Nebraska and whether you're going to allow slavery there or not. You're looking at the Compromise of 1850. That's allowing slavery to expand. Everything up until the actual Civil War is whether slavery should expand into the new territories. So Manifest Destiny makes us constantly question whether slavery should expand. And so here it is. So what's the significance of the following battles during the Civil War? So remember the Battle of Bull Run, that's the first battle of the Civil War, and that battle is basically going to show that the war is going to last a heck of a lot longer than people actually thought. So it shows that the U.S. is actually going to have to really buckle down and try and win the Civil War. Gettysburg, the Battle of Gettysburg is considered a turning point for the American Civil War for the simple fact that the United States of America will now be pursuing the Confederate Army. The Confederate Army is going to be retreating further and further in the southern land. Vicksburg is another turning point for the United States during this time period. And Vicksburg is a turning point because they're going to split the Confederacy in half. So General Ulysses S. Grant, he's going to take the Mississippi River. It splits the Confederacy in half. And now Ulysses S. Grant is going to become the head general, the head commander of the U.S. Army. And President Lincoln has found a general who is actually willing to fight the Civil War. Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. This is where Confederate General Robert E. Lee is going to surrender to the United States General Grant. When he surrenders, the war is over. Lincoln has, a breath, and then he gets assassinated by a Southern sympathizer, John Wilkes Booth. So who issued the Emancipation Proclamation and what did it actually state and the significance? President Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation January 1st, 1863. And what it basically says is that all states that are in rebellion, which are basically the Confederate states, he frees their slaves. Now, he never calls them the Confederate States of America because Lincoln does not believe that secession is legal. He does not actually recognize that the southern states have ever left the United States. He believes that is impossible. You cannot divorce in this country. And so when he frees them, he says, I free all the slaves in the rebellious states. And so what ends up happening is the people who are abolitionists, they've been waiting for this moment, because at the beginning of the Civil War is completely 100% about rejoining the Union, getting the North and the South back together in this big, happy United States of America. But now, January 1st, 1863, is no longer about just joining the country. It's now going to be about freeing slaves, a moral purpose. And at least at this time period, it's only going to be in the actual rebellious states of the Confederacy. The 13th Amendment will free all slaves, but the Emancipation Proclamation just frees them in the seceded states. Northerners join the war. It's a moral victory for the abolitionists. Now you have more and more people backing President Lincoln. Remember, there are copperheads in the North who are saying that you should just let the South go ahead and have their slavery and have their secession. And he does this, and now he's got more support than he had before. So summarizing the Civil War, our Reconstruction amendments, name the Reconstruction plan that supported each. So remember, 13, 14, 15, the easiest way to remember this is free citizens vote. So the 13th abolishes slavery, frees all the slaves. The 14th Amendment is going to give citizenship, which is due process under the law. And the 15th Amendment is giving voting rights. So all citizens get the right to vote, right? You got to be free. You got to be a citizen in order to vote. So presidential Reconstruction, which is done by President Lincoln and President Johnson, is going to be very forgiving. It's not going to be harsh. And that means that they're only going to pass the 13th Amendment. Congressional Reconstruction, our military Reconstruction, our radical Reconstruction, they support the 14th and the 15th Amendment, which gives citizenship and voting rights to all former slaves or all persons born on U.S. soil. Now, please understand, it's called radical Reconstruction or harsh Reconstruction because it's kind of different than what everybody else is saying. It's radical because it's extreme. It's not bad. If you're a former slave, congressional military Reconstruction is definitely the Reconstruction plan you want because it's the one that's going to give you rights. The presidential Reconstruction is basically going to let the South have their way. They might not have slavery, but they're not going to allow you to have voting rights or citizenship. So 30, you have to compare presidential Reconstruction and military Reconstruction. Remember, President Lincoln is about with malice towards none, with charity towards all. Okay, so that is nice, easy, and forgiving. And that is the way President Lincoln is. And all he was going to do was pass the 13th Amendment. Congressional Reconstruction is much harsher. It's much more punishing to the South because they see the South as the ones who started the Civil War. And they're going to pass the 14th and the 15th Amendment. They're also going to put the military in control of the South. So when you do a crime in the South now that the military's down there, you go through military court. A military court's a lot different than civilian court, meaning a jury of your peers does not exist in a military court because if you're a civilian, non-military personnel, you should be tried by other non-military people, but that's not how it works in a military court. You're going to have military soldiers trying you. And you're just a regular everyday Joe in the city of Atlanta. So 31, what was the Tenure of Office Act and how is this act significant for the Reconstruction period? Tenure just means contract, guys, so don't get confused about it. So the Contract of Office, the Tenure of Office Act stated that the president is not in charge of Reconstruction, that only Congress is in charge of Reconstruction. So imagine it like this. You have a legislative, an executive, and a judicial branch, right? The legislative branch just put a big X on the President of the United States. And the legislative branch says, not only do we make the laws, but we're also going to enforce the laws. Okay, so they eliminated a branch of the government. President Andrew Johnson violates this because he fires a radical Republican, one of his secretaries. He fires a guy. After he fires him, the radical Republicans use this and they go after him and they impeach him. So after him, what you really see is only weak presidents for the United States, because Congress is going to be in control of the United States. The next president will be Ulysses S. Grant, and he's a two-term president. He's well loved, but the guy really follows Congress. I mean, he's not a bad president, but you have the whiskey ring, you have the whiskey ring scandal, and you have the Credit Mobilier scandal during his presidency. He has a scandal-plagued presidency. He also, he does good stuff. Like, he pretty much drives out the KKK from the South with his military. Like, he does a good job of that. But he is a weak president. So when you look at number 32, it says list the three parts of the Compromise of 1877. I even gave you the page number in your textbook, so you should have been able to figure it out. 1, Hayes is going to become the president. 2, the military is going to be withdrawn from the South. And 3, Reconstruction's over and all the southern states are back in the United States. Why this is important is that in the election of 1876, there's no clear winner, and so a compromise is reached. It's the give and take. Hayes gets to become the president. He's a Republican. The military is going to be removed from the South. That's a big win for the South. The South gets back into the actual United States. The North doesn't have to funnel any more money into trying rebuilding the South. If they're not rebuilt, screw them. That's how the North's looking at it at this point, because they're in the middle of an industrial surge. Their economy is doing great because they have all the factories. So after this is the solid South that's going to develop. The solid South refers to the Democratic Party ruling in the South. And if you are a black citizen and you're living in the South, this is really when you see a lot of violence. Crime against someone's race is going to start. So you see a lot of hate crimes developing during this time period, because the military is not there to keep the KKK and other hate groups in check. So what is the Freedmen's Bureau? It's created to help former slaves adjust to life after slavery. And freedmen, you're former slaves, so that's why they're called freedmen. And when you're a slave, remember, every moment of your day is regulated by your slave owner. And because your slave owner is regulating every single thing, you don't really have any free moments in life, okay? So you got to give them money, you got to give them job skills, and you got to give them a basic education, because remember, it was illegal for slaves to learn how to read and write, because if they can learn how to read and write, they're going to start thinking about how slavery is wrong. So they didn't let them do that. It's going to give this to former slaves and poor white men as well. 34, what's sharecropping and what led to its development? So sharecropping is when you give a % of your crops that you actually get from your land to the person who owns the land. So you're poor, and that means you can't own your own land. You don't have enough money to buy land. So you rent land through actually paying with your crops. So you don't even have any money. You actually got to give a % of the crops. It basically replaces slavery. And because it replaces slavery in the South, this time you're not just going to have black people that are going to be enslaved. You're going to have poor black and white people in the South being enslaved through sharecropping and tenant farming. It developed because there's no slaves, there's no labor system anymore, and so the South creates their new form of labor, which is sharecropping and tenant farming. That's goal 3 on your study guide.